Welcome to Green Building Matters, the original and most popular podcast focused on the green building movement. Your host is Charlie Cicchetti, one of the most credentialed experts in the green building industry and one of the few to be honored as a LEED Fellow. Each week, Charlie welcomes a green building professional from around the globe to share their war stories, career advice, and unique insight into how sustainability is shaping the built environment. So settle in, grab a fresh cup of coffee, and get ready to find out why green building matters.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Cicchetti. I've got green building professional, entrepreneur, prop tech, air quality, wellness. Gosh, we're going to have a great conversation today. I've got Michael Driedger with us. He's the CEO at Airsset, and he's up in Vancouver, British Columbia. Michael, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing really well. It's a beautiful day here, but not as nice as in Atlanta. I'm really jealous of your weather.
And I'm glad that you even said you like Atlanta before we got on the podcast. So just can't wait to learn a little more because, you know, you've got the LEED credentials. You spent some time in sustainability and green buildings and working with a really cool sustainability architect. And now look at you with, you know, going all in on prop tech and this wellness movement. So we'll get to that, but take us back, if you would. You know, where'd you grow up and where'd you go to school?
So I grew up in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, which most Americans think is a made-up place, but middle of Canada. Second coldest place in Canada. Winnipeg always wins number one. So I grew up in a very, very cold climate. My last name, Driedger, is a Mennonite name. So family of builders and farmers. Sort of all around me. So I sort of was always involved in building. Like my dad was a general contractor, so I worked with him. The house that I lived in was built by my grandfather. The house that my grandmother lived in was built by her husband. Like it's a very, very traditional sort of like Mennonite Saskatchewan upbringing, although more in the city. Like I had the true sort of, my grandmother's a funny one. She grew up in a village where their source of heating was a cow. So, born in the dirty 30s, right? So fascinating. Fascinating.
Really cool. I'm sure clearly that's had influence on you as you got into architecture and buildings and all that. So just growing up around that, those artists. And so, you know, you've got 2 degrees as I understand it. So tell us kind of what happened. You went architecture, archaeology, maybe then went to work a little bit and then kind of came back for some more. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so growing up in, my dad was a general contractor that mostly did office buildings, and I have it on my LinkedIn. I was standing in a dumpster full of drywall that I had installed the year before, and I was thinking, this makes no sense. Like, really, like as a society, how have we gotten, you know, that tens of thousands of years into the future and done this? This doesn't make sense to me. So then I was like, okay, well, I want to understand how people used to build things. So I got, you know, and obviously being from a Mennonite background, simple building stuff, I love that kind of thing. So I ended up getting a degree in archaeology, anthropology, spending some time in the Middle East, which is where I made some good connections there and friends. And then when I lived in Japan for a little while, teaching English. I sort of like to pick up language and like to pick up things around the world. But then when I came back to the US after, Canada, the US, my wife's American, I decided to go to BCIT. And it was around the time at BCIT that the USGBC was just sort of forming and getting started. In BC, I was sort of one of the very early people that started the green building professionals. And I think I was one of the first 3 people at Green Drinks in 2006 or something, or 5 maybe even. I think I was like the 4th lead AP in Canada. So I was very involved in that, working for architecture firms, but really just all I wanted to do was sustainability stuff, LEED, etc.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you is, you know, how did you really get that sustainability focus? Like, hey, the rest of my career is going to be with kind of sustainability, green buildings. It sounds like childhood influence, but then, you know, LEED was coming on the scene. You got your LEED AP, but when did it really like, okay, this is what I'm doing?
I think it was when I ended. So I worked for a while for an architectural firm that was really focused on project management. And I did 2 or 3 really interesting LEED projects. And it was at that time, no one wanted to do LEED because they were like, it's new, it's confusing. You got to read tons of books. And I was, I didn't care. But it was really not until I went to Perkins & Will and ended up just going into the sustainability group at Perkins & Will that sort of had me really deep. I mean, I was doing at one point 85 projects a year, all LEED or living building or all that other kind. So the exposure was fantastic. Yeah. And then I started my own firm after that. And the reason I started my own firm was one of the things that I always found frustrating, like, because sustainability is a lot of different things. You know, growing up, Mennonite, simple family stuff, like, that's very sustainable behavior, right? Having a cow as a eating source, pretty sustainable. But like, I found that in architectural scenarios, I swear the sustainability solution was always either a green roof or a fin. And on the mechanical side, it was always like Mitsubishi VRF or something like that, right? Like, and it just became one of those things where I just didn't like the idea that because your biases are hard to overcome. So I started my own firm and just said, okay, no biases. We don't do design. We don't do mechanical design. We don't do architecture. We just talk sustainability, energy modeling, and all that other kind of stuff. So that was the first company I started in 2012 was Edge. And then one of the things that people have always asked me, like, you do lots of research around sustainability. What's the biggest thing in sustainability? And I said software integrations, because we have everything we need, right? Solar panels, good insulation, airtight windows, triple glaze, all that exists. Our real problems are integration problems. So the first company I started was a company called Operto. So it was a prop tech IoT company that was really focused. I wanted to save energy in hotels. We were doing an energy model for a project in Saudi Arabia, and the hotel had the same energy footprint as the outpatient clinical care center. And I was like, is that right? And energy modeler said, yeah, no, that's right. It's a 24/7 facility that never turns itself off. So the purpose of Operto was basically just to be able to set back the thermostat, because most hotels run at 40% occupancy, 50% occupancy most of the year. But in reality, nothing ever turns off. So the purpose of Operto was to save energy, but then it became its own sort of guest technologies platform. So that's that's the story of Operto. And then I sort of transitioned out of that. I'm still, shareholder in Operto, but I've transitioned out of that to be full-time focused on Airsset, because air quality has always been sort of my biggest passion. So now I've got all the tools, right? I've got, LEED, sustainability projects. I started a prop tech startup. So now I have the tools to do the thing I've always been meaning to do.
Thanks for connecting the dots there and getting us to entrepreneurship, but still in this, call it green building wellness movement. So looking back, did you have anyone you might call a mentor, or anyone you looked up to, anybody that opened a door for you along the way?
Honestly, it's my grandmother, who's like 94 years old now. Like, whenever I tell people about sustainable building strategy, so that house I was telling you about that my grandfather built are like code minimum in the 70s. So let's call it R8 walls. So imagine R8 walls and -50. And she ran that thing. It's incredible how she ran it. So she would control all entries through the garage. So she'd use the garage as a giant windbreak. Yeah, exactly. And then she would had a landing with just tarps and drapes and stuff like that, because air infiltration is your biggest enemy. So and I remember too, we would get plastic bag. We have in Canada, we have milk in bags, or we used to anyway in Saskatchewan. She would cut the top of it and she would fill it with beans and radishes and whatever else and use it for freezing. Like, nothing went to waste. Like, literally nothing went to waste. So so she's been my mentor, you could say, but not in the same way as you'd think of most academic mentors. Sure. More of like leading by example mentor.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that story. It's so simple but genius, and just had a big impact on you, clearly, because that's what's top of mind for you. I really like that a lot. That's really cool.
And that's why I've always been about simple things, right? Simple systems, right? Like, I've done super complicated projects, and then you hand it over to a guy who's used to running a boiler, and he's like, well, and then he freezes your geofield, because no one's explained to him how to run a geofield, right? You got to recharge it. It's a lot of concepts that need to be explained. So I've always been a fan of simple stuff, right? You can have really sustainable buildings that are very, very simple.
Get back to simplicity. So as you're looking back, what are some things you're really proud of? What are some of your proudest achievements?
That's a really good question. I mean, I'm always most proud of the teams that I've built. either at Edge, Operto, or Airsset, because I'm so focused on making positive change, right? And the only way you can make positive change is lots of different people, lots of different skill sets, because I have a limited skill set, right? I can't code. I'm not good at accounting. There's all these things that you need to see. I'm really proud of surrounding myself with smarter people than me that sort of fill out my rough edges.
And that's really cool. Just, the leadership side of, I guess, building a business and stuff. And, you have some influence, but just hiring great people. It sounds like a big part of all these companies you've been a part of, especially in the last, say, 5
years. And great business partners too, right? Like you always want to make sure that you're on the same page, you're aligned, you're doing things for a shared passion, not just from money's obviously important, but you're also doing it because you care about what you're doing. Because it'll last longer. The relationships last longer that way.
100%. So when you look back too, I always like to ask someone that, was there a project, maybe in your Perkins Will time when you do those 85 lead projects in a year, it doesn't have to be the biggest, doesn't have to be the tallest, but just, was there a project that you're real proud of when you're really in the zone on that sustainability work?
It's funny, it was actually before that. The project I was most proud of was, it was a waste transfer facility when I was at, and I remember thinking, this is fascinating because it was a waste sorting facility and no one had ever certified a waste sorting facility because LEED's written for an office building. So we had to do tons of creative things around the doors are always open. Is that considered a view? Or this would have been 2006 or something. So we had to get really creative about what does it mean to have a green building? So I think that one was fun. And then I also I was very proud of that project. And then I ended up working on 2 more because once you've done one, you're you're a specialist in waste transfer stations. So yeah, no, I liked that one a lot. That was really cool. HDR. They were called CEI at the time.
Oh, and way to apply LEED to a building that you're right isn't by the book and have success with it. So that's cool. Let's so let's talk about today. So tell us about your company today, and what do you offer to the marketplace, and kind of how's that going? What keeps you busy?
Yeah, that's keeping me the most busy. So in all my years of doing sustainable buildings, I've never done any with great air quality, and it's kind of because if you even look at the LEED scorecard, it's heavily weighted towards energy materials. And IAQ is a tiny category, and also. I'm a big believer that data is everything. So if you do these audits, right? And it's sort of if you were to do an energy model for 2 days of the year or 1 hour of the year, 2 hours, the coldest day and the hottest day, but there's 87, 60 hours in a year. How useful is this? But that's still how the industry goes. Same with air quality, right? Air quality, you'll do an audit before the building opens, or you'll do that's 1 week, right? And we all know the variability that happens in these buildings. And so air quality in buildings is actually pretty atrocious when you start measuring it, but it's all fixable. It's all very easily fixable, right? As easily fixable as my grandmother making sure that her place could, it's opening windows at the right time, turning on humidification to address, low levels of humidity, or the opposite where you are. You have high levels of humidity. You got to find a way to pull it out of the air through cooling or whatever it may be. The solutions are complicated. It's just there's no triggers and there's no data to actually make air quality great. So the platform we built is built on top of IAQ devices. So indoor air quality IoT devices. And it's a wide variety of them because sometimes you're not allowed to connect to the internet. And so some of these devices will connect to LTE, and then others will connect directly via Modbus because sometimes you have to connect directly to the HVAC system, Ethernet, Wi-Fi. So we're connected to, I think, 9 devices now. The focus is devices in a space, but we are connected to some devices that are in a duct, which is, in my opinion, a bit of a design flaw to put IAQ or CO2 monitoring in a duct because, as LEED says, it should be between 3 feet and 6 feet off the ground for CO2. That's the right place to put it. How often is that done? Not very often, sadly.
Man, obviously we have this wellness movement. We've had the pandemic. I'm sure that's good for business. That's probably helping. But one thing I picked up on this conversation, it's important for the real time You're right. So you can catch the trends. It's not the one time I knew you were coming. I didn't use the bleach and ammonia for the cleaning that night. How do we make sure at all times we've got much better indoor air quality? So that's what I'm hearing a lot of what your company does. And
absolutely.
And so do you put out devices too, or no? Your software, you're connecting to devices that are already deployed in buildings and collecting all that information.
Well, I wish that they were deployed in buildings. Then we would just be the software layer on top. Sadly, we're also facilitating the hardware, which is fine. We don't mind doing that. Like, it's basically, think of it as an all-in-one. So, because it's just easier for people. Like, most people don't have devices. So we'll often supply devices. So one of our solutions consultant who actually helps people pick and through their journey will say, okay, well, what are you trying to accomplish? Like, what do you need to measure, right? Do you need to measure radon? You'll need this device, right? No radon issues? Okay, you need this device type. He's also a reset AP. So he understands how to help people pick the right things. And then it's just a matter of putting the right information in the hands of the right people at the right time. So facilities managers need alerts, real-time alerts, right? And tell you to focus on building one out of your 20 building portfolio that week instead of randomly guessing which one to, go do some work on. Tenants really just want to know the space they're in, right? So you're going to give them not a full portfolio of information. Literally, it's like, I'm standing here in the lobby and this is what I'm, okay, good to know. It's good right now. But then we also have a module for reporting because a lot of our partners / clients are indoor air quality consultants, commissioning consultants, industrial hygienists. And one of the problems with massive amounts of data from IEQ is that it will fill up an Excel spreadsheet and all the lines of code in an Excel spreadsheet. So we've built a reporting module as well so that they can still do full reports, like compliance reports for people saying you met OSHA WorkSafe guidelines or the WHO or Fitwell or whatever the case may be.
It's exciting, man. And, everybody check out Airsset, check out the website, connect here with Michael. And, it sounds like you're just, has the pandemic been helpful, right? More awareness to this? I mean, it's led to new business. How would you explain the last couple of years?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the awareness is definitely high. On the policy side, it's going to be very good to finally see air quality be written in specifics instead of vagueness. Right? Like, we've all seen the lease agreement that says a landlord must supply adequate air quality. What is adequate? And now we're going, adequate is 900 parts per million CO2, 200 parts per million, relative humidity of this, which are all written into ASHRAE 55 or 62, right? But nobody really pays attention to them. So that's one good thing from the pandemic. We've had good movement on facilities that are fully occupied. So bank branches where people are still coming in, daycares, et cetera, et cetera. Offices are slow. Like, we don't have a lot of office clients per se because everyone's going, wow, we're at 20% capacity in our office because everyone's working from home. But that's slowly changing. Like, we're seeing a massive wave of people coming back now that Omicron seems to be on the downslip. And we're moving into people's offices much more over the last month. As they come back. Yeah, it just makes sense. So my next question is a peek to the future. Let's say you had a crystal ball, see this green building movement, or maybe in your case, wellness and prop tech. Where do you see what's next? Because I've been in the industry so long, if you look at the history of rating systems, right, like BOMA and LEED, very energy focused, extraordinarily energy focused, a little bit materials focused, but everything coming out now and all the trends are Fitwell, reset. So health is really becoming the thing that everyone really wants to rally around. I'm not saying that energy is not important. We don't have to reduce carbon, and the climate emergency is a huge problem, but that seems to be getting the public imagination more. So there's a lot of traction in that direction, which is great. So I see that definitely just like rolling out at massive levels, right? Like, I see in the next, so if you think about it, in 1950, I think it was 52, when London had that crazy smog that killed all those people. And it took till, I think it was almost 71 for them to have a Clean Air Act. This is what happens, right? Like, we have these events and we go, we must have clean outdoor air. this is the event. The pandemic is the event that has triggered people going, we need to talk about indoor air quality. So that's definitely good. Like I'm hearing rumblings that, OSHA, WorkSafe BC, all these others are actually going to say, okay, instead of us having very like check, you've seen BOMA, right? It's just check boxes. It's like, did you do an audit in the last 2 years? Did you do that? Like everything is going from relatively vague to very specific and very prescriptive, which is a good thing.
Yeah, then just more education around that and just case study and but it's good. It's moving that way. We agree.
Yeah,
it's got to. And right, we're in the middle of it right now. So let's talk a little more about you as a green building professional. What's your specialty or gift?
I think it's basically being a generalist. Like the one thing that I think that's always endeared me to clients when I was doing most of my consulting, I don't do much consulting anymore, is that I didn't have a bias, right? Like, so I'd have opinions with the civil engineer, right? And I remember one time in a meeting saying, look, this is not related to LEED, but this is a bad stormwater strategy because your pipe is full, right? Like, because I'm relatively pragmatic. I'm like, the pipe's full. Like, you have nowhere to put it in a storm event. So where are you going to flood? This is a bad idea. You want to flood places? Let's come up with a proper stormwater strategy. Forget about LEED, because they weren't going after any of those credits. But we were in an area where, and this was the other thing, they were using data from 20 years ago. So storm data from 20 years ago is useless. Like we've all seen storm events. Like you have a 200-year storm event every year now. It's like no, guys, you can't use those 20-year-old files. I'd say that's probably it.
I like it. No, stay generalist, but just it's okay to speak up.
It's okay to speak up, and also just like don't. That's my best piece of advice. It's like don't. Like there's lots of different solutions. Like the sort of alluded to at the beginning. Engineers always want there to be an engineering solution, and honestly, sometimes it's a maintenance solution, right? Or it's an operational solution to a problem, right? It's just don't let your biases overcome good solutions to sustainable building problems.
That's some really good advice. I like that. Thanks, man. Let's talk a little bit about good habits, routines, rituals. Do you have any that you could share that help you stay on point?
Yeah, I mean, I go to bed really early. I get up really early. It's one of those. So one of the people I work with quite a bit is all about longevity. And they say that like the number one thing you can do is just get good sleep, right? It's also good for your brain. And I also I like to work out in the morning, and I've got a bad back from all my years in construction. So it's like maintenance, right? So I'll get up at like 5:30, exercise. It also just wakes up the brain too. That's probably my best advice. Like get enough sleep and take the morning to get exercise. Because if you don't do it in the morning, you're never going to get to it in the rest of the day.
And then you have that when you're feeling good, you accomplish something, and it's just a workout. So sleep. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. Can you give any sleep tips? They say, hey, make sure you black out your room, cover up any lights, get away from blue light on our phones and our devices. So just since it seems like you're really pretty good at getting that sleep, what's at least one sleep tip you'd give to our audience?
Well, I think most people intuitively know this, but you want to have good CO2 levels when you're sleeping. It's like if you've ever been camping, you sleep super well. One, you're tired, but also it's like the CO2 level that our brains evolved on for 60, 70, 80, whatever, 100,000 years. So if you can have a window cracked or a fan running or whatever, and can keep your CO2 below 900, you'll get the most restful sleep. Because really high CO2, you have very fitful sleep. The other one is humidity is also hard. Like when you're breathing, like if your nasal passages are too dry or too wet, and you're not comfortable, sometimes it means adding a humidifier. Sometimes it means, whatever the case may be. Those are the two that I focus on is CO2 and humidity.
Those are great tips, and it kind of relates to the work we do. Yeah. I'm a fan of a bucket list. So you could give us a peek. What are one or two things maybe on your bucket list? Any travel or adventure? Do you want to write a book? What are one or two things on your bucket list?
That's a really good question. I mean, I don't think much about a bucket list because I've got kids. So I just think about like getting them to and fro. But I've been everywhere. Like, I lived in Japan for multiple years, and I've been all over the world. And I think on my bucket list is like I've really enjoyed. I like starting new things. But on my bucket list is to help someone else start something. So like I've never had time to mentor. I've never done it. So on my bucket list is to help mentor someone through a startup. I would say definitely be on my bucket list. In terms of travel, I'd like to take the kids back to some of the places that I've been to. I'd say that would be another bucket list thing so they can experience. We were about to do this and then the pandemic hit. Right? Like, I'd like for you to experience the Eiffel Tower and I'd like for you to experience Barcelona like I did. And then the pandemic hit and we couldn't do it.
It's coming soon. How old are your kids?
My kids are 12 and 9. My daughter just finished an indoor air quality case study of her class.
That's amazing. Oh, man.
Yeah, she's a smart girl.
Oh, that's really cool. My boys are 13, 10, and 8. I got 3 boys there, so we're close in age on a couple of them. Yeah, the bucket list is a great question. I love to ask, and I guess to know you. You've been very open here. Thank you. I got 2 final questions. Those listening, some, Michael, have maybe been doing this for a long time, as long as you and I have, and some of what you've said has been validating to them. They maybe have been thinking about it, but they heard it from you on this podcast. So, yep, you got to keep going. And then some are kind of jumping in now. Maybe they're switching careers, or maybe they're a young professional. So, 2 more questions up. Is there any career advice you wish you'd have known earlier?
That is a very good question, because I think given my very early stage of getting into this, I didn't get career advice because it was my parents. It's funny, my parents didn't even know what I did. Do you know what I mean? Like, well, you're not an engineer or an architect. I don't know what you do. Right? Like the world is very finite, especially for people my parents' age and my grandparents' age. My grandmother was so cute. She's like, "You still doing the green roof thing?" Which is very cute, right? Because they can't understand. They can't wrap your head around it. So I think but now that's totally, you wouldn't have to give someone that advice. They get that like there's new jobs all the time. I think the one thing that I would recommend to really, really young people coming out of school is, listen, no one cares about your grades. Like, no one cares about your grades. Don't focus on your grades. Like that is probably the one thing I did right. So going to BCIT, I skipped class all the time to go to green building events because they were there, right? Like it was the first time that I took my education from the USGBC and the CAGBC at the time. CAGBC didn't exist at the time. It was Cascadia. Take your education where you can get it. Podcasts, wherever you can get it. It's actually, most of your best education is going to be free, or you're going to get paid to do it, right? You're going to get paid to do it at a job, and you're going to learn it on your own. Because academia is too slow, way too slow. They're teaching you stuff 5 years from 20 years ago because that's when they got their funding to teach that stuff. So it's don't worry about your grades. Finish school, but don't worry about your grades. Your learning is everywhere else.
Thanks for sharing. That's really sage advice, and it is about finishing there. But what you put your attention to, attention can scale, and that's really good.
I like that. Attention can scale. I haven't heard that. I'm going to use that.
Use it. Actually, it's time is finite, right? This 30, 45 minutes you and I are sharing together, it's gone. But the thing, so we put our attention to, they can really scale. So attention scales. So last question. Let's say someone is listening to this podcast. They're really enjoying it, but they're jumping in right now. They're just getting into this green building movement. Any words of encouragement for them as we come to a close?
Yeah, even if you can't find your ideal job, just keep doing it. It doesn't matter. Like even if you end up in finance, I mean, if you think of even accounting, basically I've said to people, lead is environmental accounting. You'll get all the skills you need to track carbon, to do all these kind of, like, don't worry where you end up. Like people these days transition in and out of jobs all the time. Just think of the core skills that you're getting and how they're going to help. I had a job at a paint department while I was putting myself through school. The best training on MSDS sheets in the world. Like I knew a ton about paints and ceilings. Right? Job at Home Depot was a great stepping stone to lead. Honestly, it was.
Man, great advice. Everybody connect with Michael on LinkedIn. This has been Michael Driedger coming to us from Vancouver, BC. I really enjoyed our chat today, man. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, it was great chatting with you, Charlie.
I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.